The summer of 1878 had been unforgiving. For weeks, the blazing Arizona desert stretched endlessly before the Whitmore family's wagon train, swallowing the horizon beneath waves of shimmering heat. 22-year-old Clara Whitmore sat quietly on the driver's bench beside her father, her fingers wrapped around the leather reins as 6 covered wagons creaked across the dusty trail. Like the other families traveling west, they dreamed of fertile land, a fresh beginning, and a future untouched by the hardships they had left behind. As the sun began to sink behind distant mesas, the travelers decided to make camp beside a narrow stream surrounded by towering cottonwood trees. The gentle sound of running water offered a rare sense of peace after another exhausting day. Children laughed as they chased one another between the wagons. Women prepared supper over crackling fires while the men checked their rifles and horses. Clara helped her mother stir a pot of stew, smiling as the orange glow of sunset painted the cliffs beyond the camp. For a brief moment, it felt as though they had outrun every danger the frontier could offer. They were wrong. The first gunshot echoed across the valley just after nightfall. A horse screamed. Then another shot. The peaceful camp exploded into panic as bullets tore through canvas wagons and frightened settlers scrambled for cover. Shadows moved swiftly between the trees, impossible to count. Warriors burst from the darkness with terrifying speed, their cries mixing with the thunder of gunfire. Clara watched in horror as her father shoved her behind an overturned wagon. "Run," he shouted. It was the last word she ever heard him speak. She stumbled into the darkness, tears blurring her vision while smoke drifted through the trees. Around her, chaos consumed everything she had known. Flames climbed the wagons, lighting the valley with flickering orange light. The air smelled of burning wood, gunpowder, and fear. She had almost reached the edge of the forest when someone seized her arm. She struggled wildly, expecting death. Instead, she found herself staring into the calm, unblinking eyes of a tall Apache warrior unlike any she had ever imagined. He wore no expression of triumph or cruelty. His long black hair was braided with eagle feathers, and faint streaks of red ochre marked his face. Around his neck hung carved bone charms that clicked softly with every movement. Though younger than Clara expected, he carried himself with quiet authority that silenced even the warriors surrounding him. The others lowered their weapons as he approached. No one questioned him. One warrior spoke rapidly in Apache, but the leader answered with only a single word. Immediately, every voice fell silent. Clara didn't understand the language, but she understood power. This man commanded absolute obedience. The warriors bound her hands but treated her differently from the other prisoners. She was placed upon a horse instead of being forced to walk. No one struck her. No one threatened her. The silence frightened her more than violence would have. Hours later, they reached a hidden canyon where dozens of fires burned beneath towering cliffs. The Apache camp rested quietly beneath an enormous desert sky filled with countless stars. Yet something felt strange. The people stared at Clara not with hatred, but with unease. Some whispered prayers. Others refused to meet her eyes. Even the children hid behind their mothers. An elderly woman approached and studied Clara's face for a long moment before touching a small turquoise pendant hanging around her own neck. She whispered something to the chief. His expression darkened. As midnight approached, the moon slowly rose above the canyon. Its deep crimson color spread across the desert like fresh blood. A blood moon. The entire camp gathered in silence around a circle of ancient stones worn smooth by countless generations. Torches surrounded the clearing, their flames dancing in the warm desert wind. Clara's heart pounded as the warriors untied her hands and guided her into the center of the stone circle. She searched desperately for a way to escape. There was none. The chief stepped forward carrying a carved wooden bowl filled with glowing embers and fragrant desert herbs. Sweet smoke curled into the night air as he began chanting in a slow, rhythmic voice. The people answered each verse together. Though Clara understood none of the words, the ceremony felt impossibly old, as if it belonged to a time long before either of their worlds existed. The chief dipped his fingers into red clay and gently painted a narrow line across Clara's forehead. Then another across his own. He looked directly into her frightened eyes. For the first time, he spoke in careful English. "The moon has chosen." Clara shook her head violently. "I don't understand." "You will." He raised a small stone talisman carved with unfamiliar symbols and placed it in her trembling hands. "Our spirits are now joined. I don't want this. The choice was never yours." His voice carried neither anger nor joy. Only certainty. The chanting grew louder. The wind suddenly swept through the canyon with unnatural force, extinguishing nearly every torch at once. The crimson moon seemed brighter than ever, casting eerie shadows across the stone circle. Clara gasped as an icy sensation rushed through her body. For one impossible heartbeat, she saw flashes of images that did not belong to her, a child laughing beside a river, warriors riding across endless plains, an ancient mountain cave glowing with strange light, and the chief standing alone beneath the same blood-red moon years earlier. Then everything vanished. She collapsed onto the cold stone ground. When she opened her eyes moments later, the ceremony had ended. The people quietly dispersed without speaking. Only the chief remained. "You belong to the path now," he said softly. Before dawn, while the camp still slept, an elderly captive named Elias Harper quietly cut the rope securing Clara's shelter. He had lived among the Apache for years after his own capture and whispered urgently that this was her only chance to escape. Together they slipped through the silent canyon, disappearing into the desert just as the first light of morning crept over the eastern horizon. By sunrise, Clara believed she had escaped the nightmare forever. She did not yet know that no amount of distance could break the bond forged beneath the blood moon. Far behind her, the Apache chief stood alone at the edge of the canyon, staring toward the horizon where she had vanished. He closed his eyes. A faint smile crossed his face. He did not need tracks. He could already feel where her soul had gone. The desert sun had barely risen when Clara Whitmore and Elias Harper reached the banks of the Gila River. Every muscle in Clara's body ached from the night's desperate escape, but fear drove her forward. Behind them, Miles of rocky canyons and dry washes stretched toward the hidden Apache camp. She expected arrows to rain from the cliffs or warriors to appear on horseback at any moment. None came. The silence was somehow worse. Elias knelt beside the river and splashed cool water onto his weathered face. His gray beard dripped as he glanced nervously toward the eastern horizon. "They're letting us go," Clara whispered. The old man slowly shook his head. "No," he replied. "If Black Hawk wanted us dead, we'd never have left that canyon." Clara frowned. "Then why didn't he stop us?" Elias hesitated before answering. "Because he doesn't need to." His words settled heavily in her mind, though she refused to believe them. For the next 3 days they traveled without stopping for long. They crossed dusty plains, climbed rocky hills, and followed abandoned trails used by traders and prospectors. Every distant rider made Clara's heart race, yet no one pursued them. On the 4th evening they reached the frontier settlement of Red Creek, a rough mining town surrounded by wooden buildings and endless desert. Smoke rose from blacksmith shops while wagons rattled along the dirt streets. For the first time since the massacre, Clara felt she might finally be safe. The townspeople welcomed the exhausted travelers. The local doctor treated Clara's bruises, and the hotel owner offered her a small upstairs room overlooking the main street. That night she slept in a real bed. But peace did not last. Shortly after midnight, Clara awoke with a gasp. She wasn't in the hotel anymore. At least, it didn't feel that way. In her dream, she stood once again inside the ancient stone circle beneath the blood-red moon. The desert wind whispered around her, carrying voices she couldn't understand. Across the circle stood Black Hawk, perfectly still, his dark eyes fixed on hers. He did not speak. He simply watched. The strange stone talisman rested in his hand, glowing faintly with a crimson light. Then he slowly pointed toward the east. Clara suddenly felt an unbearable pull inside her chest, as though an invisible rope had wrapped itself around her heart. She jerked awake, drenched in sweat. The room was empty. Yet the scent of burning desert herbs lingered in the air. The same scent from the ritual. The next morning, Elias listened quietly as Clara described the dream. His face turned pale. "I prayed it wouldn't happen." "What does it mean?" "It means the ceremony wasn't just for show." Clara laughed nervously. "Dreams can't hurt anyone." "They can," Elias answered. "Especially when they're not dreams." Before Clara could question him further, a frightened rancher burst into the hotel. "They're coming." The entire town rushed outside. Dust clouds rolled across the western hills. Horsemen. The sheriff ordered every able-bodied man to grab a rifle. Women hurried children into buildings while storekeepers barred their doors. Clara climbed onto the hotel porch and stared at the approaching riders. There were only 6 of them. Far too few to attack a town. The riders stopped nearly half a mile away. One figure sat at their front. Even at that distance, Clara recognized him. Black Hawk. He remained perfectly motionless. Watching. Waiting. Then, without raising a weapon, he turned his horse and disappeared back into the desert. The other warriors followed. No attack came. No arrows flew. The townspeople remained confused. Only Clara understood. He wasn't threatening the town. He was reminding her that he knew exactly where she was. Word spread quickly across Red Creek. Some believed Clara had brought danger upon them. Others whispered that she carried some terrible curse from the desert. By evening, suspicious glances followed her wherever she walked. 3 days later, disaster struck. Several horses vanished from the town stable. A supply wagon was found overturned outside the settlement. 2 miners disappeared while returning from the hills. No one saw who had taken them. Fear turned into anger. At a town meeting, several citizens demanded that Clara leave before worse happened. You brought him here, one man shouted. We were peaceful before you arrived. It's not safe while she's in town. Clara wanted to argue. Instead, she silently packed her belongings. She refused to let innocent people suffer because of her. Before dawn, she and Elias slipped away from Red Creek, heading north through the mountains. Days became weeks. Every place they stopped seemed to share the same fate. Black Hawk never attacked directly. He simply appeared. Sometimes travelers spotted him watching from distant ridges. Sometimes hunters found fresh horse tracks circling camp before disappearing without explanation. Once, Clara looked into a calm lake and, for just a heartbeat, saw Black Hawk's reflection standing behind her. She spun around. No one was there. The invisible bond was growing stronger. One cold evening, they found shelter inside an abandoned trading post high in the mountains. As rain hammered the roof, Clara finally confronted Elias. You've been hiding something from me. The old man stared into the fireplace. I lived among Black Hawk's people for almost 15 years. Then tell me the truth. He sighed deeply. There are stories older than the United States, older than these settlements, stories the Apache elders guarded for centuries. What stories? They speak of a soul bride. Clara's heartbeat quickened. A woman marked beneath a blood moon. One whose spirit becomes tied to another's through an ancient ceremony. She remembered every word Black Hawk had spoken. Our spirits are now joined. No, she whispered. I don't believe this. You don't have to believe it, Elias replied softly. It's already happening. Clara reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the small stone talisman Black Hawk had forced into her hands during the ritual. She had tried throwing it away 3 separate times. Each time, somehow, it had returned among her belongings. Its carved symbols now seemed darker than before. As she stared at it, the stone suddenly became warm. Not from the fire. From within. Far away, somewhere beyond the mountains, Black Hawk opened his eyes beneath the night sky. He turned his horse toward the north. He smiled faintly. The trail was clear once again. He did not need scouts. He did not need footprints. As long as the bond remained unbroken, Clara could run across every desert, forest, and mountain in the American frontier. He would always know where her soul had gone. And the hunt had only just begun. The storm had passed before dawn, leaving the mountain trails wrapped in a cold mist. Clara Whitmore tightened her coat against the biting wind as she and Elias Harper continued north. Their horses moved carefully along the narrow path carved into the rocky cliffs. Below them, rivers rushed through deep canyons, their waters swollen by the night's rain. Neither traveler spoke much. The silence between them was filled with questions that neither could answer. Clara reached into her pocket and touched the stone talisman. It had become strangely warm over the past several days. Sometimes it pulsed gently, almost like the beat of a human heart. She had wrapped it in cloth, buried it beneath loose stones, and even thrown it into a river. Somehow, it always found its way back into her possession. She no longer tried to explain it. After 2 days of hard travel, they arrived at a small mission church standing alone at the edge of a dusty valley. The white adobe walls were cracked with age, and a weathered wooden cross leaned slightly above the entrance. Bells that had once called settlers to prayer now hung silent in the morning breeze. This is St. Michael's mission, Elias said quietly. If anyone knows the truth about Black Hawk, it's Father Thomas. An elderly priest stepped outside as they approached. His silver hair framed a deeply lined face, and his gentle blue eyes seemed to recognize trouble before a single word was spoken. Elias, the priest said warmly. You've been gone many years. And I wish I were returning under better circumstances. Father Thomas welcomed them inside. The small chapel smelled of old wood and candle wax. Sunlight streamed through narrow windows, painting colorful patterns across the stone floor. When Clara finished telling her story, the massacre, the ritual beneath the blood moon, the strange dreams, and Black Hawk's relentless pursuit, the priest remained silent for a long time. Finally, he stood and walked toward an old wooden chest tucked behind the altar. He unlocked it with a rusted key. Inside lay several worn journals, faded maps, and brittle sheets of parchment covered with handwritten notes. "I prayed," Father Thomas said softly, "that I would never hear this story again." Clara's heart skipped. "You've heard
I'm
it
telling you,
before."
I just opened up my laptop,
The priest nodded.
come up with like a few ideas.
40 years
and that's
ago. He carefully
like,
opened one of
I
the
think
journals.
we even started this one like
Its
it
yellowed
got
pages
monetized
contained
beginning
sketches
of
of unfamiliar
it's called
symbols.
November.
The same symbols carved into Clara's talisman. This legend existed long before settlers came west.
So in this video, I'm
Father
gonna
Thomas
break down
explained.
how we launched multiple
Among certain
these
Apache
videos,
elders, there was an
average that
ancient
data
prophecy passed from one
editors are doing.
generation to the next. He turned another page, revealing the drawing of a woman standing beneath a crimson moon.
Shouldn't imply even.
They called her the Soul Bride. Clara stared at the
First
illustration. It resembles you. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Father Thomas
This one of the
continued.
stable.
The prophecy tells of a woman who would appear beneath a blood moon after surviving
Cool.
great death.
And those also like stable
Her
channels.
spirit would become linked with a chosen guardian. Together, they were said to restore balance between the living world and the world of the ancestors. "I don't want to restore anything," Clara whispered. "I just want my life back." "I know." The priest closed the journal. The prophecy was never meant to steal someone's freedom. Somewhere through the generations, its meaning became twisted. Elias folded his arms. "You believe Black Hawk truly thinks Clara is this soul bride?" "I do." "But why?" Father Thomas sighed. "Because his people are dying." He looked toward the chapel window where the distant desert shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. Disease, war, hunger, and broken treaties have taken much from them. A desperate man will cling to any hope, especially one wrapped in prophecy. Clara lowered her eyes. For the first time, she saw Black Hawk as more than a ruthless hunter. He was a man trying to save what remained of his people. But that did not excuse what he had done. Later that afternoon, another visitor arrived at the mission. The sound of horse hooves echoed outside before a tall rider dismounted in the dusty courtyard. He entered quietly. He was younger than Clara expected, perhaps 30 years old, with sun-darkened skin and sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. His long black hair was tied behind his shoulders, and he carried both a rifle and a traditional Apache bow. Father Thomas smiled. "Clara, this is Daniel Gray Wolf." Daniel nodded politely. "I've tracked Black Hawk before." Clara looked surprised. "You know him?" "We grew up together." The room fell silent. Daniel noticed her unease. "I left our people years ago," he explained. "I serve as a scout now. I help guide travelers safely across these lands." "Can he be stopped?" Clara asked. Daniel hesitated. "Yes." Hope flickered inside her. "But not by running." He spread an old hand-drawn map across the table. Near the center stood the outline of a jagged mountain surrounded by winding canyons. "This place is called Spirit Mesa." Father Thomas immediately recognized it. "The oldest sacred ground in the territory." Daniel nodded. "The blood moon ritual begins there, and it can only end there." Clara studied the map. "So if we go there, you may break the bond. And if we don't?" Daniel's expression grew grim. "Black Hawk will never stop hunting you." That evening, the three of them prepared for the dangerous journey. Father Thomas gathered supplies while Daniel checked the horses and weapons. As darkness settled over the valley, Clara stepped outside alone. The stars stretched endlessly above the desert. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe. Then she heard it. A distant drum. One slow beat. Then another. She turned toward the hills. Far across the valley, dozens of tiny campfires burned beneath the night sky. Daniel appeared beside her. They're closer than I expected. Black Hawk. He nodded. He knows we're here. Clara looked toward the flickering lights. How? Daniel answered quietly. He doesn't need scouts anymore. Almost instinctively, Clara reached into her pocket. The talisman had become almost too hot to hold. At that exact moment, nearly 10 miles away, Black Hawk sat beside his own fire. Without opening his eyes, he smiled. He could feel her fear. He could feel her determination. Most of all, he could feel that she was finally traveling toward the one place where destiny would either bind them forever or destroy everything he had sacrificed to protect. The race to Spirit Mesa had begun. Neither of them knew who would arrive first. But both understood one thing. Only one of them would leave with their future intact. The first rays of sunlight spilled across the desert as Clara Whitmore, Daniel Gray Wolf, and Elias Harper left St. Michael's Mission behind. Spirit Mesa lay nearly 100 miles to the southeast, hidden beyond a maze of towering canyons, dry riverbeds, and jagged cliffs. Every mile brought them closer to the place where the mysterious bond had begun, and closer to Black Hawk. Daniel led the way with quiet confidence. Having spent his childhood among the Apache, he knew secret trails that wound through the wilderness unnoticed. They traveled through narrow passes where ancient rock walls rose like giant fortresses, their surfaces covered with faded pictographs left by generations long gone. Stay close, Daniel warned. These canyons can hide more than rattlesnakes. Clara nodded, gripping the reins tightly. She had learned not to ignore his instincts. For 2 days, the journey remained peaceful. They crossed shallow rivers, camped beneath towering cottonwood trees, and avoided the main trails where travelers were most likely to be seen. Yet Clara never truly relaxed. She constantly felt as though someone was watching from beyond the cliffs. On the third evening, they reached a high ridge overlooking miles of open desert. Daniel suddenly raised his hand. Stop. Everyone froze. Far below, several riders moved slowly across the valley floor. Clara narrowed her eyes. There were only 4 of them. One rider sat slightly ahead of the others. Even from that distance, she recognized the familiar silhouette. Black Hawk. He wasn't following their tracks. He was riding directly toward the canyon they planned to enter the next morning. How does he keep finding us? Clara whispered. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the talisman hanging from a leather cord around Clara's neck. It isn't your footprints he's following. Clara instinctively covered the stone with her hand. It can't be. Daniel's expression remained serious. Sometimes the oldest stories survive because they're true. That night, they made camp beneath an overhanging cliff. A small fire crackled quietly while Elias prepared coffee. Daniel stood watch near the edge of the camp, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness. Clara struggled to sleep. When she finally closed her eyes, the dreams returned. She found herself standing beside a wide river beneath a bright blue sky. Children laughed nearby. A younger Black Hawk knelt beside a little boy, teaching him how to carve a wooden horse from a branch. A smiling woman watched them from beneath a cottonwood tree, her long black hair blowing gently in the breeze. The peaceful scene warmed Clara's heart. Then everything changed. Gunfire echoed across the valley. Soldiers rode into the village. Flames swallowed the homes. The woman screamed. The child fell. Black Hawk ran toward them, but he was too late. The river turned red. Clara gasped as grief unlike anything she had ever known flooded through her chest. It wasn't her sorrow. It was his. She awoke with tears streaming down her face. Daniel was already kneeling beside her. You saw something. Clara nodded slowly. I saw his family. Daniel closed his eyes. I was afraid the bond would deepen. He had a son. Yes. And a wife. Daniel stared into the dying fire. They were killed during a cavalry raid 12 years ago. Clara looked down at her trembling hands. I felt everything. The ritual is allowing you to see pieces of his soul. She shook her head. I don't want his memories. You may not have a choice. The next afternoon, they entered Fire Canyon, a place known for its towering red sandstone walls that glowed like burning embers beneath the afternoon sun. The silence felt unnatural. No birds sang. No insects buzzed. Daniel's horse suddenly stopped. Its ears flattened. Something was wrong. An arrow struck the ground only inches from Clara's horse. Ambush! Daniel shouted. Warriors appeared along the canyon walls. They fired arrows from above before disappearing behind the rocks. Daniel returned fire with his rifle while Elias hurried Clara behind a large boulder. The attack was swift and carefully planned. Yet something seemed strange. The warriors weren't trying to kill Clara. They were driving the group apart. Another wave of arrows forced Daniel away from the others. Smoke bombs rolled into the narrow pass, filling the canyon with thick gray clouds. Clara coughed violently as she struggled to see. Then a familiar voice echoed through the smoke. Clara. She froze. Black Hawk stepped calmly from the haze. His bow remained lowered. His expression was neither angry nor cruel. Only determined. You are close now, he said. I'll never go with you. You already walk beside me. No. He looked directly into her eyes. You have seen my memories. Clara's silence confirmed it. My family. He continued quietly. My people, everything I loved was taken from me. I'm sorry for what happened. I do not seek your pity. Then what do you want? You are the promise that remains. Clara stepped backward. I'm not a prophecy. His voice remained calm. You are the only path left. Before she could answer, Daniel burst through the smoke, firing his rifle into the air. Black Hawk disappeared behind the rocks as quickly as he had appeared. The canyon fell silent.
If you
once
burn
again.
wood to keep your family
When
warm,
the smoke
the single
cleared,
most
the warriors were gone. But Daniel's face turned pale. Elias.
holding water in dead fiber.
Clara looked around. The old man was nowhere to be seen. Only his overturned horse remained. Near the saddle lay a single eagle feather. Daniel picked it up.
And fed driftwood for a
him.
season looks
Clara's
like
stomach
acid
tightened.
damage. Because
No.
that is what it is.
They want us to follow.
Rule.
She stared toward the winding
not
canyon where
burn it
Black
out.
Hawk had vanished.
The fire
Her
lofts
first
it up
instinct
into
was
the
to keep
air
riding
you are
toward
breathing.
Spirit Mesa.
Here's what
If
your
they delayed,
grandmother would have
Black
slapped
Hawk
your
might
wrist for
complete
even
whatever
carrying
remained
near
of
the
the ritual.
woodshed. Do not
But
burn
Elias
poison
had risked
ivy,
his life
poison
to save
oak, or
hers.
poison sumac.
She couldn't
Ever.
abandon him.
The oil
Daniel
in the
watched her
plant,
carefully.
urushiol, rides
rescue
the
him,
smoke
we'll
straight
lose
into your
valuable
lungs
time.
and your eyes.
And if we leave him,
Skill and not a
Daniel lowered
hobby.
his head. He'll die.
Your
Clara looked toward the setting
great-great-grandfather
sun.
walked out of a store in
For weeks she
1830.
had done nothing but run. Every decision had been made out of fear. Not anymore. She drew her father's old revolver from its holster and checked the cylinder. Then she looked at Daniel with steady, determined eyes. We're done running. A faint smile crossed Daniel's face. I was hoping you'd say that. As darkness settled over Fire Canyon, the two mounted their horses and turned toward the trail left by Black Hawk's warriors. Ahead lay the enemy camp. Beyond it waited Spirit Mesa. For the first time since the Blood Moon ritual, Clara was no longer fleeing from the hunter. She was riding straight toward him. And before another moon rose over the desert, the chase would become a battle from which only one destiny could survive. Night wrapped Fire Canyon in darkness as Clara Whitmore and Daniel Gray Wolf followed the faint trail left by Black Hawk's warriors. The moon was growing fuller with each passing night, and Daniel knew what that meant. The blood moon rises tomorrow, he said quietly as they rode through the narrow canyon. Clara's grip tightened around the reins. Then we don't have much time. If Black Hawk reaches Spirit Mesa before us, he'll finish the ceremony. And if he does? Daniel looked ahead without answering. His silence told her everything she needed to know. By dawn, they found the enemy camp hidden among towering cliffs. Smoke drifted from small fires, and warriors guarded every entrance. Near the center of the camp stood Elias Harper, tied securely to a weathered cedar post. Though exhausted and bruised, the old man was still alive. Clara started forward, but Daniel caught her arm. Not yet. He pointed toward the eastern ridge. The sun will be behind us in a few minutes. They'll be looking into the light. They waited. As the first golden rays spilled over the cliffs, Daniel raised his rifle and fired a single shot into the air. The camp erupted into confusion. Warriors rushed toward the sound while Clara sprinted through the opposite side of the camp, weaving between tents and supply wagons. An Apache guard spotted her. He drew his knife and charged. Before he reached her, Clara swung the butt of her revolver into his shoulder, knocking him to the ground. She cut the ropes binding Elias and helped him to his feet. "I knew you'd come," the old man whispered. "We're leaving." A war cry echoed across the canyon. Black Hawk's warriors had regrouped. Arrows flew through the air as Daniel covered Clara and Elias with accurate rifle fire. The three escaped into the rocky hills, disappearing just before the warriors surrounded the camp. By sunset, they reached the base of Spirit Mesa. The mountain stood alone in the desert, its dark stone walls rising hundreds of feet into the crimson sky. Ancient carvings covered the cliffs, depicting eagles, wolves, and circles surrounding a blood-red moon. Clara felt the talisman hanging around her neck grow almost unbearably hot. "We're here," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "So is he." A deep drumbeat echoed across the valley. Then another. And another. From every direction, Apache warriors emerged from the shadows, forming a silent circle around the sacred mountain. No one attacked. They simply watched. At the top of the stone staircase leading to the summit stood Black Hawk. He wore ceremonial clothing unlike anything Clara had seen before. Eagle feathers rested upon his shoulders, while red and black paint covered his face in ancient patterns. Around his neck hung dozens of carved bone charms that rattled softly in the evening breeze. He raised one hand. The warriors lowered their weapons. "Come," he called. Clara looked at Daniel. "This ends tonight." Together, they climbed the ancient steps. At the summit lay the same stone circle where the ritual had begun weeks earlier. Massive pillars surrounded the clearing, each carved with symbols that matched those on Clara's talisman. Above them, the moon slowly began to change. Its pale silver glow faded. Dark red spread across its surface. The blood moon had returned. A strange wind swept across Spirit Mesa, carrying whispers that seemed to come from another world. Black Hawk stepped into the center of the circle. "You came willingly." "I came to end this." He looked at her with calm determination. "You still do not understand." "Then explain." He held out an ancient staff carved from dark cedar wood. "My people have lost everything. The old ways are fading. The spirits have become silent." He pointed toward the blood-red moon. The prophecy promised that when the soul bride and the guardian stood together beneath the second blood moon, balance would return. Clara shook her head. "Balance built on stealing another person's freedom isn't balance. It is sacrifice. It is obsession." For the first time, anger flashed across Black Hawk's face. "You speak of freedom while my people bury their children. And you think forcing me into this will save them? I know it will." "No," Clara replied firmly. "You only hope it will." The word struck him harder than any weapon. For a brief moment, uncertainty crossed his face. Then the chanting began. The warriors surrounding the circle sang the ancient prayer, their voices rising with the desert wind. The carved stones surrounding the altar began to glow faintly, and the talisman around Clara's neck lifted into the air as if pulled by an invisible force. The ground trembled. Daniel drew his rifle. The warriors charged. Gunfire shattered the night as Daniel fought desperately to keep them away from the stone circle. Elias joined the battle with an old revolver.
So in this video, I'm going to show you
Daniel's
what to
back
do
while arrows
change for
flew
new
through the
channels
darkness.
with
Meanwhile, Clara struggled against the invisible force pulling her
I've gone
toward
more
Black Hawk.
alone. I'm not
The glowing
count
talisman
that Unframe
floated
came on.
between them. Images flooded her mind.
I cannot produce
She
value
saw generations of Apache families
make a lot of
hunting
money
beneath peaceful skies.
without putting
She saw
some work
settlers
in.
crossing the
That doesn't
frontier.
exist.
She saw
Sorry,
battles,
sorry,
disease,
10 videos, just
broken
so scared.
promises, grief, and endless loss. Then she understood. The prophecy had never demanded ownership. It had called for unity. Its meaning had been twisted by fear and desperation over many generations. Black Hawk reached for her hand. The ceremony is almost complete. Clara looked into his eyes. For the first time, she saw not a monster, but a broken man carrying the unbearable weight of an entire people. She gently lowered his hand. No one can save the future by taking someone else's choice away. She grasped the floating talisman with both hands. I reject this bond. The stone cracked. A brilliant flash of crimson light exploded across Spirit Mesa. The ancient pillars shook violently. Thunder rolled across the desert although the sky held no clouds. The glowing symbols carved into the stones shattered one by one. A powerful wind swept through the sacred circle, knocking warriors to the ground. The chanting stopped instantly. Black Hawk stumbled backward. No. The talisman split into countless pieces. A blinding wave of light burst upward toward the blood moon. For one breathtaking moment, every spirit trapped within the broken ritual seemed to rise into the night sky before dissolving like sparks carried away by the wind. The mountain fell silent. The crimson glow faded from the moon. The invisible chain that had bound Clara's soul for weeks suddenly disappeared. She took a deep breath. For the first time since the night of the massacre. Her heart belonged only to her. Black Hawk slowly fell to his knees. The mysterious power that had guided him was gone. The prophecy had been broken. And with it, the destiny he had sacrificed everything to fulfill. The silence that followed was unlike anything Spirit Mesa had known for centuries. The fierce wind that had roared through the sacred circle faded into a gentle desert breeze. The glowing symbols carved into the ancient stones disappeared one by one, leaving behind nothing but cracked rock and scattered fragments of the shattered talisman. Above the mesa, the blood moon slowly lost its crimson color. Its deep red glow faded into soft silver as the shadow passed, bathing the desert in peaceful moonlight. Clara Whitmore stood motionless in the center of the circle, breathing heavily. For the first time since the terrible night of the wagon train massacre, the strange weight inside her chest was gone. The invisible pull. The haunting dreams. The constant feeling that someone was walking beside her. All of it had vanished. She placed a trembling hand over her heart and smiled through tears. I'm free, she whispered. Nearby, Daniel Gray Wolf lowered his rifle. The remaining Apache warriors had stopped fighting. They looked toward Black Hawk, waiting for his command. But their chief remained on his knees. The powerful leader who had once seemed unstoppable now looked like an ordinary man carrying the burden of unimaginable loss. Slowly, he picked up one of the broken pieces of the talisman. It was cold. Lifeless. The sacred power he had trusted for so many years had disappeared forever. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Black Hawk lifted his eyes toward Clara. I believed the spirits had chosen you, he said quietly. Clara stepped closer, though she kept a respectful distance. I think they wanted you to remember something. He frowned. What? That no prophecy is stronger than a person's freedom. Black Hawk stared at the broken stone in his hand. His thoughts drifted back through the years. He remembered his wife smiling beside the river. He remembered teaching his young son how to ride a horse. He remembered the day soldiers had destroyed everything he loved. From that moment forward, grief had become his master. When the elders spoke of the soul bride, he had clung to the prophecy with desperate hope. He convinced himself that completing the ritual would restore balance, protect his people, and give meaning to his family's deaths. Instead, his obsession had only created more suffering. He slowly stood. The warriors immediately straightened, expecting new orders. Black Hawk looked at every face surrounding him. Many had followed him since childhood. Many had lost family just as he had. They deserved peace, not another endless war. He raised his voice. The hunt is over. The warriors exchanged confused glances. One of the older fighters stepped forward. But Chief. Black Hawk gently raised his hand. No more. His voice echoed across Spirit Mesa. No one will pursue Clara Whitmore again. Silence settled over the gathering. Then, one by one, the warriors lowered their weapons. Daniel watched carefully, hardly believing what he was seeing. Years earlier, he had left the tribe because he feared Black Hawk's growing obsession. Now, for the first time in many years, he recognized the man he had once respected. Black Hawk turned toward Daniel. You chose a different path. Daniel nodded. I did. You were wiser than I was. The two men shared a quiet understanding. No more words were needed. As dawn approached, the Apache warriors gathered their horses and prepared to leave Spirit Mesa. Before mounting his horse, Black Hawk walked toward Clara one final time. He reached into a leather pouch hanging from his belt and removed a small eagle feather wrapped with turquoise beads. My son carried this, he said softly. I want you to have it. Clara accepted the gift with both hands. I'll take care of it. Black Hawk looked toward the eastern horizon, where the first light of morning painted the sky with shades of gold and orange. Perhaps, he said, our peoples will someday meet without fear. I hope so. Without another word, he climbed onto his horse. The warriors followed as he rode slowly down the mountain trail. No victory songs echoed through the desert. No celebrations marked their departure. Only quiet reflection. Within minutes, they disappeared beyond the distant hills. Clara watched until the last rider vanished from sight. Elias Harper stepped beside her. I never thought I'd live to see that. Neither did I, Clara admitted. The three travelers began the long journey back toward civilization. Weeks later, they arrived at a small frontier settlement not far from the river where Clara had first escaped after the ritual. The town had suffered greatly from years of conflict between settlers and nearby tribes. Homes had been abandoned. Fields lay empty. Fear divided everyone. But change began slowly. Daniel acted as a guide and translator, helping settlers and Apache families speak instead of fight. Trade replaced raids. Agreements replaced threats. Though mistrust did not disappear overnight, each season brought small signs of hope. Clara helped rebuild the settlement's schoolhouse. She planted cottonwood trees along the riverbank, believing future generations deserved shade where there had once been sorrow. Children from different backgrounds soon played together beneath those growing trees, laughing without caring where each family had come from. One warm autumn evening, nearly a year after the battle at Spirit Mesa, Clara stood alone on a nearby hill overlooking the valley. The desert glowed beneath the setting sun. She reached into a small wooden box she carried and removed two keepsakes. The eagle feather Black Hawk had given her. And the largest remaining fragment of the shattered talisman. She held them together for a moment before placing them back inside the box. They were reminders of a painful journey. Not reminders of fear. But of courage. She had learned that destiny was not a chain that bound people forever. Every person, no matter how powerful the prophecy or how deep the past wounds, could choose a different path. As the first stars appeared overhead, Clara smiled. The nightmares had stopped. The whispers beneath the blood moon had fallen silent. The hunt that once seemed endless had become nothing more than a memory carried away by the desert wind. Far beyond the western mountains, Black Hawk rode alone beneath the fading light, no longer chasing a prophecy, but searching for a future his people could build with their own hands. 2 lives once bound by fear had finally been set free. And as the morning sun rose over the endless Arizona desert, it illuminated not the end of a hunt, but the beginning of peace. The summer of 1878 had been unforgiving. For weeks, the blazing Arizona desert stretched endlessly before the Whitmore family's wagon train, swallowing the horizon beneath waves of shimmering heat. 22-year-old Clara Whitmore sat quietly on the driver's bench beside her father, her fingers wrapped around the leather reins as 6 covered wagons creaked across the dusty trail. Like the other families traveling west, they dreamed of fertile land, a fresh beginning, and a future untouched by the hardships they had left behind. As the sun began to sink behind distant mesas, the travelers decided to make camp beside a narrow stream surrounded by towering cottonwood trees. The gentle sound of running water offered a rare sense of peace after another exhausting day. Children laughed as they chased one another between the wagons. Women prepared supper over crackling fires while the men checked their rifles and horses. Clara helped her mother stir a pot of stew, smiling as the orange glow of sunset painted the cliffs beyond the camp. For a brief moment, it felt as though they had outrun every danger the frontier could offer. They were wrong. The first gunshot